We live in a world that has over 14,500 weapons capable of unleashing the power of the sun itself. Nuclear weapons are the most devastating device known to man, and yet we view them as a necessity for the survival as a species. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay, a United States B-29 Superfortress bomber, flew into Japan and dropped the first atomic bomb, called the Little Boy. It instantly killed 80,000 people and another 112,000 with its aftermath, and you can still see its effects on patients today who suffer different forms of cancer in their family. On August 9th, a second was dropped onto Nagasaki, killing roughly another 140,000. They called it the greater good because Americans wouldn't have to risk their lives on an island invasion to end the war. Oppenheimer, one of the creators of the nuclear bomb, wrote, "The optimist thinks this is the best of all possible worlds. The pessimist fears it is true." It's been 75 years since we dropped a nuclear bomb on one another, and that threat still looms over us every day of our lives, whether we realize it or not. Fat Man, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, had a yield of 20 kilotons, a firecracker compared to the nuclear warheads we have today. The B-83, the largest American bomb, is 1.2 megatons, over 1,000 times stronger than the Fat Man. A scary thought. During the Cold War, there were many times where we came within minutes of nuking each other, which would have costed the lives of millions, perhaps even billions. But now, with rules in place and the fear of mutually assured destruction, we've taken our hand off of the trigger. Now let's have a hypothetical. We forgot about mutually assured destruction and started another nuclear war. Within 5 minutes, the first nuclear weapons would be launching and landing on key cities. Now let's stop time and imagine that a B-83 bomb was just dropped into the heart of Seattle. We just dropped a B-83 on First and Pike. Instantly, a fireball hotter than the sun engulfs anything between the edges of Belltown and the International District. Anything that can be vaporized is. 1 second you exist, and the next you don't. All of the buildings, docks, and water is evaporated into nothing but a scorched hole on the ground. And if you're not in that ball, you're still not safe. Everything from the Woodland Park Zoo to Georgetown is demolished. At 5 psi overpressure, most residential buildings will collapse and injuries are universal. Fatalities are widespread, and the chances of a fire starting in a commercial and residential damage area are high, and the buildings so damaged are high risk of spreading said fire. Entirely, over 175 kilometers squared is obliterated. Here, you'll face the rubble, broken bones, and blindness if you happen to be looking towards the blast, not to mention the thermal radiation. The thermal radiation covers 547 kilometers squared. That's from Broadview to Burien. In this zone, third-degree burns extend throughout the layers of the skin and are often painless because they destroy the pain nerves. They can also cause severe scarring or disablement and require amputation. If you don't need to amputate, you will still never feel again, and at this range, your clothes and hair will have melted to your skin, which is near boiling temperature. The light blast covers 1,390 kilometers squared. That's all the way from Des Moines to Mount Lake Terrace, and across the water to Bainbridge Island. At around 1 psi overpressure, glass windows can be expected to shatter. This can cause many injuries in surrounding populations who come to a window after seeing the flash of a nuclear explosion, which travels faster than the pressure wave following it. In an instant, you've just killed 304,000 people that were in about their daily lives and gravely injured another 475,420. You also just caused another possible 1.5 million minor injuries. Now that the bomb is dropped and the damage is done, what happens? There are no hospitals to go to, no ambulance you can call, and no firefighters to drag you out of the rubble. The infrastructure of an entire city was just annihilated by a single bomb. More than likely, you'll die slowly under a collapsed skyscraper, gasping for life. In the following days, the survivors will emerge from the rubble to a firestorm or black rain. If there was enough flammable material when the mushroom clouds sucked air up from the ground, it will have spread fire into the city, and if it was wet, as it usually is in Seattle, a vile black rain will start to fall, irradiating everything that it touches. And as the radiation sits in the clouds to be blown around by the wind, it'll carry it into neighbor cities, doing damage there. This combination of a lack of infrastructure, fire, and radiation makes it nearly impossible for rescue workers to retrieve people from the blast. In Chernobyl, the firefighters they sent to respond to a melting down reactor were being admitted to hospitals with undiagnosed acute radiation sickness. As they entered these buildings wearing their uniforms, they carried with them enough radiation to do irreparable damage to the workers and other patients around them. To this day, the basement of that hospital that is filled with those uniforms is known as one of the most radioactive areas on Earth, and after some time, people will be able to get in to help, but for many, it will be too late. Yasujiro Tanaka, a survivor of the Nagasaki bombing, who was 3.4 kilometers away from the epicenter, said, "I was 3 years old at the time of the bombing. I don't remember much, but I do recall that my surroundings turned blindingly white, like a million camera flashes going off at once. Then, pitch darkness. I was buried alive under the house, I've been told. When my uncle finally found me and pulled my tiny 3-year-old body out from under the debris, I was unconscious, my face misshapen. He was certain that I was dead. Thankfully, I survived, but since that day, mysterious scabs began to form all over my body. I lost hearing in my left ear, probably due to the air blast. More than a decade after the bombing, my mother began to notice glass shards growing out of her skin, debris from the day of the bombing presumably. My younger sister suffers from chronic muscle cramps to this day, on top of kidney issues that have left her on dialysis 3 times a week. What did I do to the Americans, she would often say. Why did they do this to me? I have seen a lot of pain in my long years, but truthfully, I have lived a good life. As a first-hand witness to this atrocity, my only desire is to live a full life, hopefully in a world where people are kind to each other and to themselves." Fujio Torikoshi, a survivor of the Hiroshima bombing, stated, "On the morning of August 6, I was preparing to go to the hospital with my mother. I had been diagnosed with a vitamin deficiency a few days earlier and had taken the day off of school to get a medical exam. As my mother and I were eating breakfast, I heard the deep rumble of the engines overhead. Our ears were trained back then, and I knew it was a B-29 immediately. I stepped out into the field in front, but saw no planes. Bewildered, I glanced to the northeast and saw a black dot in the sky. Suddenly, it burst into a ball of blinding light that filled my surroundings. A gust of hot wind hit my face. I instantly closed my eyes and knelt down to the ground. As I tried to gain footing, but another gust of wind lifted me and I hit something hard. I do not remember what happened after that. When I finally came to, I was passed out in front of a stone water container used to extinguish fires. Suddenly, I felt an intense burning sensation on my face and arms, and tried to dunk my body into the container. The water made it worse. I heard my mother's voice in the distance. "Fujio, Fujio." I clung to her desperately as she scooped me up in her arms. "It burns, Mama, it burns," I said. I drifted in and out of consciousness for the next few days. My face swelled up so badly that I could not open my eyes. I was treated briefly at an air raid shelter, and then later at a hospital in Hatsukaichi. Eventually, I was brought home wrapped in bandages all over my body. I was unconscious for the next few days, fighting a high fever. I finally woke up to a stream of light filtering through the bandages over my eyes, and my mother sitting beside me, playing a lullaby on her harmonica. I was told I had about until the age of 20 to live, yet here I still am, several decades later, aged 86. All I want to do is forgive and forget, but the prominent scar on the back of my neck is a daily reminder of that atomic bomb. We cannot continue to sacrifice precious lives to warfare. All I can do is pray, earnestly and relentlessly, for world peace. If you're scared by this thought, you should be. For the first time in human history, we have the capability to wipe ourselves out with the click of a button. Luckily for us, the world as a whole has started to phase out nuclear weapons from their active ordnance. As early as 1950, there were large movements to ban nuclear weapons as a whole, with the World Peace Council organization amassing 560 million signatures to remove nuclear weapons. In 1986, the Arms Reduction Treaties were signed, which was meant to de-escalate tensions from the US and Soviets and begin limiting and dismantling the amount of nuclear bombs each country had. However, any of these treaties involved years of negotiation and seemed to result in important steps in the reductions and reducing the risks of nuclear war being removed, which shows how far we still have to go as a world.